Okay, welcome back, students. Good day, whatever time of day it is. Welcome back to Mr. Lawhon's AP European History Notes. We've been talking about the age of religious wars. And in our last section of Notes 4.2, we talked about Philip II and his struggles with controlling the Netherlands and how the Netherlands kind of broke away and became independent. And we're going to kind of dive back into that a little bit because today we're going to talk about 4.3. What role did religion play in conflicts in England in the 16th century? So we've talked about France, we've talked about Spain and the Netherlands, and now we're going to talk about England. But what we're going to talk about today is going on at the same time as the religious conflicts in France, like the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, and the same time as Philip II is trying to go on and take over the Netherlands. But we're going to focus on England today. Let's dive right into it. Pause if you need to. Okay, so when we left off with England, right? Remember, we were talking about Henry VIII. That's kind of the last time we really talked about England. Henry VIII split from the Roman Catholic Church. He formed the Anglican Church. Remember, he wanted to divorce his wife, and then he had 6 wives, and 2 of them he had killed, and you remember all that. Well, remember all that, guys, because we're going to talk about his children now that are ruling, okay? So, we're going to first start off by talking about Lady Jane Grey of England. Now, you might be like, who's Lady Jane Grey of England? As a matter of fact, you might be thinking that about every time I introduce somebody in this class because you are learning European history. Yes? Well, Henry VIII's son, remember, Henry VIII had one son with Jane Seymour, right? Then Jane Seymour died. Remember, that was the love of his life, but he had one son, Edward VI. And remember, Edward VI was under the tutelage of the Duke of, I can't remember, but he was a duke, an English duke, and he was a Protestant, right? So he kind of helped Edward VI, Henry's only son, to steer England into a Protestant direction because remember, Henry was still very Catholic and they passed the Acts of Uniformity. They had a common English prayer book. Well, anyway, Henry VIII's son is going to die at 15 years old, and he pretty much dies of, I think, tuberculosis was the actual cause. So he dies, but before he dies, it was his plan to put on the throne after him because he didn't have an heir, Lady Jane Grey of England. Now you might be like, who is Lady Jane Grey? Well, he's Protestant. And it's his teenage cousin, Lady Jane Grey. So his idea was, I'm going to have my cousin be the new heir to the throne because she's Protestant. Now, here's the problem with Lady Jane Grey. She doesn't have a good, strong claim to the throne as somebody else, which we're going to talk about, all right? The rightful ruler was Mary Tudor. Now, you might be like, who is Mary? I know that I've heard that name before. Well, guys, go back to Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, right? The first wife of Henry VIII, the one he wanted to divorce. They had one child together, and her name was Mary Tudor. So the very first heir of Henry VIII had the strongest claim to the English throne. So Edward VI tries to put his cousin on the throne, but Mary Tudor is actually the rightful ruler. And even though there are a whole bunch of people that support Lady Jane Grey to be on the throne, she actually gets crowned queen, and she's like queen for a handful of days, and then she gets taken off the throne. Why? Because there were uprisings all over London. Because, guys, people in England very passionately wanted the rightful ruler, Mary Tudor. So all of her supporters pretty much abandoned her, and they dipped out. And they kind of left her alone. And guess what happens to Lady Jane Grey? She gets beheaded. All right. So Mary the First becomes the new Queen of England instead. So it's anyway. Now, why does this matter? Well, guys, this is the fight between Protestants and Catholics, okay? Edward VI, 15 years old, said, I want my cousin to be the next ruler of England because she'll be Protestant. And Mary I was very much still Catholic. Remember, Catherine of Aragon was the woman that Henry divorced, right? And started his own church and became the Protestant church, right? So Mary Tudor, if people thought that if she becomes queen, she'll bring England back to being a Catholic nation. And boy, does she. Pause if you need to. Okay, England under Mary the First. All right. So England had been Protestant since 1535. If you remember, Henry VIII and his parliament passed a whole bunch of laws that made England a Protestant nation, created the Anglican Church, and specifically in 1535, the Act of Supremacy made Henry the Earth, Henry VIII, the supreme head on earth of the Church of England. All right. So England had been Protestant since 1535. But in 1554, Mary is going to do something crazy. She's going to marry Philip II of Spain. Yes, the same guy that we talked about in 4.2, the guy that's trying to mess with the Netherlands. This is all going to start going on at this time that we're doing the notes right now. All right? So it's almost like we're talking about the same time period from three different perspectives. The French perspective, we're talking about it from the Spanish perspective, and now we're going to talk about it from the English perspective, all right? So what we've been talking about in the last three essential questions is going on right now, all right? So Mary is married to Philip II of Spain. Now, if you are Protestant in England, you think, oh, great. Not only is Mary Catholic, but she married the Catholic of Catholics. So now England is going to swing back to being Catholic again. Now, during her reign, one of the things that she does, well, several of the things that she does, is she repeals all of those laws that the Parliament of England passed to make England Protestant, like the Acts of Uniformity, the English Common Prayer books. They throw all that stuff out, and she repeals all the stuff that Edward VI did to England. So she, guys, is going to bring England fully back to being Catholic. Now, what about those people that are Protestant, right? Because remember, Henry VIII wasn't alone in wanting England to be Protestant. Well, guys, she's got a plan for that too. Most of Henry VIII's supporters that were still alive, if you remember, we talked about Thomas Cranmer, one of his big Protestant supporters of, hey, break away, do this, right? She has them all executed. All right. So any of Henry VIII's old Protestant supporters, if they were still alive and around, boy, do they go to the chopping block, right? They get executed. Now, what about other Protestants throughout England? Well, guys, throughout her reign, you can see she's going to go, and her eyes are going to get red because anyway. So she has about 287 Protestants burned at the stake under her 5-year reign, earning her the nickname, dun, 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 Bloody Mary. Yeah, this is Bloody Mary. That when you go to the bathroom and you turn off the lights and you say her name in the mirror. Guys, don't do that. All right, don't mess with that stuff. But anyway, I don't know. My daughter, true story, guys. My daughter said her and her friends, she's 9, they were in the bathroom at school and they tried the Bloody Mary thing. She didn't even know who Bloody Mary was, and then I told her who Bloody Mary was, and she fell asleep because she thinks history's boring. Lame. Anyway, but that's who Bloody Mary was. She's called Bloody Mary because under her reign, she killed hundreds of Protestants. Now, she only rules for 5 years. And after 5 years, she dies of the flu, but she also probably had ovarian cancer. But anyway, she dies after 5 years. But bottom line is, people in England, if you're Protestant, you're scared to death, you're fleeing England, you're running away, or you're getting burned at the stake like this guy. Well, guess I'll burn. Anyway, so Bloody Mary, that's what she's known for, but she only lasts on the throne for 5 years. And now we're going to get a new ruler of England. Pause if you need to. Oh, real quick, check this out. I went to Westminster Abbey, guys. If you ever go to London, they have this huge church called Westminster Abbey, right? And in Westminster Abbey, guys, I'm not joking. Not every single, but most of the people that you've ever heard of in history in England are buried there. They're buried in the walls, they're buried in the floors, they're buried in the ceilings. And on the right, guys, look who it is. That is Bloody Mary's tomb. She is in that box, which is a very small box. She must have been really short. I don't know how short she was. But anyway, now this is Bloody Mary, the woman laying on top of her coffin right there. That's her tomb. And guys, in the middle right there where the cursor is, that's Edward VI lying right there. Isn't that crazy, guys? They're all sitting there. I'll show you more pictures as we go through the notes. But yeah, there's Bloody Mary's tomb. Anyway, okay. All right, now, next ruler. Those of you that know your Henry VIII, history that we talked about in the last unit, Elizabeth I was Henry's second daughter with who? That's right, Anne Boleyn. I knew you'd get it. So, if you remember, Anne Boleyn was the woman that Henry VIII divorced Catherine of Aragon for, his second wife. And he wanted to have a son, but they ended up having Elizabeth. But Elizabeth, guys, is going to be the next heir to the throne, and she is going to create a stable, powerful monarchy in England, all right? So she's the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, and she has a very long and successful and powerful reign, assisted by her advisor, Sir William Cecil. So, guys, Elizabeth I is going to be one of the most well-known, powerful rulers in English history. All right, now, so Henry VIII created the Protestant Anglican Church, even though it wasn't really that Protestant, right? Okay, Edward VI, his son, really makes England Protestant. Mary I comes in, Bloody Mary, and she brings England back to being Catholic. Well, Elizabeth I is going to swing England back to being Protestant. So in 1559, working together with Parliament, they passed another act of supremacy. And what that did was it repealed all of the anti-Protestant Catholic legislation laws that Parliament passed under Mary. So she is going to swing, guys, the clock back to being Protestant again. Now, because Mary I and all of, got rid of all of these Protestant ideals, she's going to bring back an English prayer book. She's going to make a second English prayer book. And because of the act of supremacy, she is going to make Protestantism the official religion of the Church of England. The Anglican Church is from here on going to be officially Protestant. Okay. Now you might be like, well, what about all of the Catholics now that live in England? Or what about, people that don't agree with the Anglican Church? Well, we'll talk about that on the next slide. There are some of those people, guys, but she's going to bring England back to being Protestant. Pause if you need to. Okay. So one of the things that Elizabeth I does have to deal with is extremism on both sides. There's going to be extreme Catholics plotting behind her back. There's going to be extreme Protestants pushing the Anglican Church to become even more Protestant than it already is. And they're going to be extreme trying to plot behind Elizabeth I's back. So Elizabeth I, guys, is constantly being plotted behind, all right? So Catholics, even though Elizabeth is going to make England Protestant officially, the Catholics were still a majority at this time in England when Elizabeth took over. So there are all of these people, not only in England, but also Philip II at this time, and the Jesuits and other groups of people that want to lock on to England and bring Catholicism back to England. All right. So now Elizabeth tried to be a centrist. Now, a centrist means a person in the middle. All right. She didn't want England to be extremely Catholic. She wanted to be Protestant. But at the same time, she didn't want them to be extremely Protestant. She is going to try to have this middle ground, and she actually appoints an Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest religious office in England, below the monarch, as a person that too is a centrist. So she's going to try not to be too Catholic, not to be too Protestant. Now, here's what's interesting. Philip II, remember, Philip II married Bloody Mary, her half-sister, and now Philip II wants to marry her. But she refused. As a matter of fact, Elizabeth I has a nickname, the Virgin Queen. Why? Because she never married throughout her rule as queen. All right, now, why did she never marry? Well, guys, here's the deal. She used the idea of prospect of marriage as kind of a weapon, right? Because she never married, all of these people have in their minds, well, maybe I can marry her and plot, right? And by keeping marriage open, she was able to negotiate with people, all right? If people thought, oh, I might be able to marry her, then they would be a lot more open at the negotiating table, right? So she kind of used her not marrying and not committing to a marriage as a very smart tool. Now, here's the deal. Catholics want England to be Catholic, right? So Catholics are going to plot behind Elizabeth's back. The Jesuits, remember, guys, the reform group created by Ignatius Loyola. Guys, the Jesuits are going to become a very powerful force all around the world, and they are going to plot behind Elizabeth I's back. So Elizabeth I is constantly aware of all of these people scheming behind her back, so she has to be kind of on top of her game. Now, remember, there's a woman, remember this name because we're going to talk about her in a little bit. Some plotted to put another person on the throne. Her name was Mary Stuart, and she was a Catholic, and she was the Queen of Scotland. Now, at this point, guys, England and Scotland are not united yet into what's called Great Britain. That happens a little bit later, okay? But anyway, Mary Stuart is the Queen of the Scots, and she, through relatives of Henry VIII, does have a claim to the throne, but she doesn't have as strong a claim as Elizabeth. But she is very much aware, Elizabeth is, that some people might try to plot and put somebody else on the throne and make a claim. Now, there's another group of people, not just Catholics are plotting behind Elizabeth's back, but there's other group of people called the Puritans. All right. Now, if you've ever grown up learning about America and the founding of America, the name Puritan might come to your mind. All right. Puritans were the people that landed in Massachusetts Bay in the 1600s, Plymouth Rock, those guys. All right. Now, we'll talk about them a little bit later, but the whole thing of the Puritans, they were English Protestants. And what they were trying to do was they thought the Anglican Church, even though Elizabeth I is bringing them back to being Protestant, they thought the Anglican Church was still a little too Catholic. And we're going to talk about that on the next slide. And these were another threat to Elizabeth I, criticizing the Anglican Church. So Elizabeth I is trying to navigate this extremism of extreme Catholics and extreme Protestants, and she's trying to stay in the middle. Pause if you need to. Okay, who are the Puritans? Well, guys, Puritans kind of thought the Anglican Church, like I said, was a little too Catholic. How are they a little too Catholic? Well, I told you guys, if you walked into an Anglican church at the time, you would probably think that the Reformation never even came to England. They worshipped like Catholics. The priests wore the same kind of vestments and clothing as Catholic priests and Catholic officials. They had a lot of the same Catholic ceremonies, right? So even though they were Protestant, they still looked very Catholic. And Puritans called themselves Puritans because their whole goal was to, quote unquote, purify the Anglican Church from any trace of Catholicism. And that's why they called themselves the Puritans. All right. And like I said, these were the guys that roll up to Plymouth Rock in the 1600s, and they are going to start a colony in America. All right. Now, the Puritans weren't unified, all right? There were different groups of Puritans, and one of the groups are called Presbyterians, all right? Now, you might have heard of the word Presbyterian before. As a matter of fact, guys, there is a thing called the Presbyterian Church. So, who were Presbyterians? Well, Presbyterians are going to be mostly located in Scotland and England, but Scotland guys are going to be full of big Presbyterians. Now, what do they want? Well, Presbyterians wanted a national church. Okay, a national church like the Anglican Church. But here's the deal. They wanted to create these governing boards called presbyteries, and the governing boards, their job would be to control local church congregations in each little city. All right. So the idea was, it was kind of like Catholic. You've got like the Church at Rome, and then you've got dioceses, and you've got benefices, and the bishops kind of control the little local area churches. But they're Protestant, right? So they kind of wanted to recreate what the Catholic Church kind of had as far as governing and organizing, but make it Protestant, all right? Now, there were some groups, guys, that were even more radical than these guys, and these guys were called Congregationalists. Now, these were the most extreme Puritans. Here's what they thought. They thought there should be no national church, no governing boards. They literally thought every church in every area should be able to have their own autonomy. So this church over here is going to be completely autonomous. They'll have their own church officials, and that'll be different from the church in the next town. They will be completely different and have their own church officials. So guys, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, they're all Puritans, but a little bit different, all right? And all of these, in some way, pose a threat to Elizabeth I, who's trying not to be an extremist either way. Pause if you need to. Okay, guys. So, all right, now let's dive into problems with Spain. So remember way back in 4.2, we talked about Philip II was trying to gain control over the Netherlands, and the Netherlands guys are right there in that tiny little circle, right? And do you remember Philip II in the last notes sent the Duke of Alba there, and the Duke of Alba set up this council called the Council of Troubles, or if you were Dutch, you called it the Council of Blood, and started to persecute Protestants, right? And that is going to spark William of Orange and other Protestants guys to rise up and kick Spain out of the Netherlands. Well, here's the deal, guys. As Spain was invading the Netherlands, the English thought, if they invade the Netherlands and they win, well, then that might make them able to invade England. Because if you look, Spain is down here where the cursor is, and the Netherlands are up here. And if they take control of the Netherlands, that might be a pretty easy ground to just cross the English Channel here and the Spanish to invade England. So, what do the English do during this time period? Well, number one, Pope Pius V, an ally of Spain, excommunicates Elizabeth I. Remember, Elizabeth I brings England back to being Protestant. So the Pope says, Elizabeth I, you are excommunicated. You're kicked out of the church, right? Well, she didn't care anyway because she's the head of the Anglican Church. But she's accused of heresy in 1570, but she's the queen, so they ain't going to do anything to her. But bottom line is, Elizabeth is getting a little antsy because the Spanish are trying to take over the Netherlands, and that could help them take over or eventually attack England. Now, another thing that happens around this time is the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Remember, guys, Catholics in France are going to massacre in the streets of Paris a whole bunch of Protestants at Henry of Navarre's wedding, right? Or after the wedding. So, because of all this Catholic growth and all of this Catholic violence, all right, Elizabeth I is going to sign this thing called the Treaty of Nonsuch, all right? And what this did was, this provided English soldiers to go help the Dutch. So one of the reasons that the Netherlands were able to fight off the Spanish is because the English sent soldiers to the Dutch to help them. Why? Because they're all Protestant. And guess what else Elizabeth did? She funneled money to Henry of Navarre to help him fight the religious wars of France. Now, that ultimately ended with Henry Navarre becoming Henry IV of France and making the official church of France the Catholic Church, but it did allow Protestants to worship, right? So anyway, what is Elizabeth doing during these notes, guys, in 4:1 and 4:2? She's playing this game where she's giving these guys money to fight off Catholics, all right? So she's also making an enemy with Philip II. She already rebuffed his advances for marriage, and now she's giving money and soldiers to fund his enemies. Pause if you need to. Well, as you can imagine, guys, Philip II doesn't take this too lightly. So here comes some plots, okay? All right. The very first plot, and definitely the most legendary, they've made movies out of this, Mary, Queen of Scots. So remember Mary Stuart, the Queen of Scots that had some kind of claim to the English throne. Well, she's Catholic. She's Catholic even though Scotland is Presbyterian. All right, so Scotland's Presbyterian, but she's Catholic, and they allow it because she's the actual queen. Now, there is a guy named John Knox, and he kind of spies on Mary, Queen of Scots he spies for Elizabeth on Mary, Queen of Scots, even though Mary, Queen of Scots is royally Elizabeth I's cousin. But anyway, so in 1568, something crazy happens, guys. Mary, Queen of Scots is involved in this scandal. You see, she's got this lover, and allegedly her lover killed her husband. And allegedly, Mary, Queen of Scots, knew about it and maybe even consented to her lover killing her husband. But bottom line is it looks really bad, and the Scottish people kick Mary, Queen of Scots off her throne, and her life is threatened. So where does she run to? The nearest relative where she thinks she'll be safe. She runs to Elizabeth I. So she flees to her cousin to get protected, right? Now, Elizabeth I sees her, knows that she's got a claim to the throne, so is really sus about her. Or wait, nobody says sus anymore, but Mary, Queen of Scots is like, red. Red is acting kind of sus. That's what she's doing. She's acting kind of sus because she's fleeing and she's coming to England, and Elizabeth knows that she's got a claim to the throne. So what happens is she lives under house arrest for 19 years. She lives with Elizabeth, but under house arrest. Now, Elizabeth didn't trust her, but at the same time, she's her cousin. She doesn't want anything bad to happen to her, but she doesn't trust her because she does have a claim to the throne. She is a relative of Henry VIII. All right, now, here's the deal. In 1586, there was a plot discovered to possibly put Mary on the throne, even though Mary, Queen of Scots, is going to declare her innocence. So guess what, guys? They call for Mary, Queen of Scots' execution. Now, Elizabeth I doesn't want to execute Mary, Queen of Scots because she's Catholic. She doesn't want to anger Philip II and the other Catholics. At the same time, if there's a plot discovered and she doesn't deal with it, then she looks weak. So she's got to deal with this. So what she does is she consents to Mary, Queen of Scots, her cousin, being executed. And boy, guys, does Mary, Queen of Scots have a horrible execution, guys. They put her head on the chopping block. The first swing, guys, does not take her head off. She's still alive. They hit her again. The second shot does not take her head off, guys. It takes 3 hacks to get her head off. It's one of the most botched executions in English history, guys. And everybody is appalled, abhorred. They're all just like, oh, all right, because nobody should have to suffer like that. But it takes 3 shots to get her head off. Later on, people are going to question, is this really a good way to execute people? And then come up with a more efficient way. But anyway, now, Mary's execution, guys, just like Elizabeth thought, is going to anger Catholic nations. And Spain says, we are going to send the Spanish Armada to attack England. Now, the Spanish Armada is the largest navy in Europe by far, and it belongs to Spain. And they are going to bring it all down on England. Pause if you need to. Oh, yeah. So here, guys, is Mary, Queen of Scots' tomb at Westminster Abbey. It looks really epic when you walk in there. It's got this huge ceiling, but that, guys, is where Mary, Queen of Scots is lying. Anyway, took a picture of that. Okay, guys, so England versus the Spanish Armada. So the year's 1588. Philip II wants to assure Catholic dominance and control, so he sends the largest fleet in Europe to go into the English Channel, which turns out it's a very stupid idea. But he sends them into this tiny little narrow passageway, the English Channel, guys, to fight and defeat the English. Well, guys, guess what? English have their allies, the Dutch, and they have smaller, more maneuverable ships. So they were able to outmaneuver, guys, and therefore defeat the more powerful Spanish Armada. But guess what else happened during this battle? This violent windstorm sweeps through and damages a lot of the Spanish Armada sails and their ships. And the English think it's God showing Philip II, look, God wants Protestants. So they call this the Protestant wind, this windstorm, guys, that wreaks havoc on these Spanish ships. Can you imagine? They were like, yes, see, we knew God was on our side. Yes, right? But bottom line is, guys, the Spanish get defeated. The Spanish Armada get defeated. And this, guys, is a turning point in European history because up to this point, guys, the Spanish had pretty much been the unquestioned power in the world. But the defeat of their armada, guys, is going to mark the beginning of the decline of Spain as world power. And guess who's going to replace them as a world power? The rise of the English. You see, guys, before the defeat of the Spanish Armada, Spain controlled the seas. But now they're not going to. And this is going to be when England is going to start getting this idea, we want to go colonize as well. So after this, England is going to start looking to colonize the east coast of North America, which will eventually lead to the creation of the 13 colonies. Now, Spain is defeated, guys. England has secured their role. England is Protestant. And eventually, guys, Elizabeth I does die. But when she dies, she has left England a very strong, a very powerful, rising nation. Pause if you need to. Here, guys, is Elizabeth I's tomb at Westminster Abbey. Ignore the person in the background. I didn't mean to get people in the background. But anyway, it's really, I should have zoomed out a little bit more, guys. It's covered in all these gold ornate flowers, but it's really beautiful. But yeah, guys, everybody's buried at Westminster Abbey. If you ever go to London, guys, highly recommend. That's all the time we have for notes, guys. I'll see you in class.